Okay, 1 Samuel 21, we've got some conversation tonight, I hope. Let me start with this. This is a place, I think it's true. I want it to be true. This is a place where we can have open conversation. And so tonight's subject has been one of those things that, there's lots of stuff to wonder about. And so I want you to feel like you're able to say what you see here. This is a place where you can say, well, I don't know about that. What about this? And I want to tell you, I always get nervous when I have a minority opinion because, if I'm reading through all of my resources and I see everybody says one thing, and then I end up thinking, no, I don't think that's right. It just causes me to put my guard up. Where am I missing somebody else's understanding? And so I'm coming at this subject tonight having felt before the idea of, well, that doesn't sound right, but what about this, and what about this, and what about this? I want you to feel like we can have that conversation here. And then I want to tell you, I'm not going to touch on it tonight, but I was doing some prep work for Sunday morning Bible class, and I think, you'll have to see if you agree with me, I've changed, well, I wouldn't say I've changed my opinion, but I think that I found the answer to the thing that we're going to be talking about tonight. So here we are years into trying to figure this out, and I just saw something that I've never seen before. So anyway, all of that just to say, please feel free to speak. I want this to be back and forth, and I want to hear what you have to say with this. So would somebody start us on the text, please? 1 Samuel chapter 21 and verses 1 through 9. And let me, before you read it, let me remind you, the thing that we're about to read, David's on the run now. This is the very first time he's had to take off. He's literally running for his life. Saul had set men outside of his house to kill him in the morning. He got let down through a basket in the window by Michal, his wife, and so now he's running for his life. And so here we are, verses 1 through 9. Somebody read that, please. Okay, thanks, Jesse. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, let's start with this. What's wrong with this story? I've got a list of 4 things I'm going to put up on the board. But I'm curious what you see as we just read through these 9 verses. And the 4th thing, if you already read ahead, then you'll see at the end of chapter 22, that's where my 4th thing is going to be. But what do you see? Like when you read this story, do you just feel good about it, Adam?
David lies as to his mission and what he's up to.
Yes, lies. I put red dots in my Bible so that I can see them. And I got 4 of them. 4 specific things. In verse 2, David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has charged me with a matter and said to me, 'Let no one know of anything in the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you.'" That is not true. And then number 2, I've made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. So David says, we're coming out and I'm going to meet everybody. That's not true either. He's running for his life. Number 3, verse 5, David answered the priest. So the priest says, hey, I've got this holy bread, but here's the thing. You can have it if the men have kept themselves from women. And David answered the priest. And he tells this story. Truly, women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition, the vessels of the... And so he tells this story, which is not true. And then in verse 8, you have a spear, and David says, "For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. So you just read through this whole story, and it's just one lie after the next. And I know, you know, you're welcome to have this conversation too. I hope that you do. I expect somebody, I feel, well, you know, the circumstances were an emergency. He was he was running for his life, literally running for his life. But doesn't it feel just so out of place and out of character for David up to this point and for everything else that we know about David? Doesn't it just, you read this story and it's like, it just doesn't fit well with the rest of David and what's going on. What do you think about the lies? Yeah. And so yes, and this is the reason why we'll spend the whole class. We've got more than just this 9 verses to talk about in this class, but I want to spend the whole class talking about this situation, because I think what we see in this situation is David is panicking. And in his panic, he's making mistakes and doing things that he would not otherwise do. And that's my big takeaway from the class, is to say, okay, you know, the hard stuff is coming, but when it comes, stop, take a deep breath, and don't act against your morals and your conscience in moments of panic. That's my big takeaway from the whole class. Lies. What else? You can still talk about the lies, or you can say, what else is wrong with this story? Big for years. This is my big problem with this story. The thing that that I have not been able to reconcile. I'm going to put it up here because I want to keep coming back to it. Do we want to open this door? Do we want to open the door where we say, well, okay, you know, sometimes it's okay to do this thing? Well, I mean, he's running for his life. If ever there was a good time to rationalize it, it would be this. But is that a door we want to open? That's the thing that we have to wonder about here. I have this quote in my notes. It reminds me of Rob's comment and yours, Lena. He seems at his wit's end and certainly at life's edge. That does not justify his jeopardizing Ahimelech, however. Listen, the text is not recommending David's conduct, only reporting it. It may be described what he did. It may be describe what he did, but it does not care to discuss it. Okay, so Mark.
I don't really have a problem.
So let's have the class, and let's make a list of when it is okay to violate the law. I want to throw this. Keep making your comments. Keep it going, but I want to push it forward. In verse 4, I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have kept themselves from women. If you don't have a Bible that points you to other passages with references, I think you need to put this reference in your Bible so that you know it. The place in the Old Testament where you're going to find information about the holy bread is Leviticus 24 and verses 5 through 9. Let's go and look at that real quick. Leviticus 24, 5 through 9. Let's see, I'll read that for us. You shall take fine. This is what's in the tabernacle. There's lamps in the tabernacle in 24 and verse 1. And then in verse 5, you shall take fine flour and bake 12 loaves from it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each loaf. And you shall set them in 2 piles, 6 in a pile, on the table of pure gold before the Lord. And you shall put pure frankincense on each pile, that it may go with the bread as a memorial portion, as a food offering to the Lord. Every Sabbath day Aaron shall arrange it before the Lord. Regularly it is from the people of Israel as a covenant forever. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place, since it is for him a most holy portion out of the Lord's food offering, a perpetual due. That last thing in verse 9, it shall be for Aaron and his sons, they shall eat it in a most holy place. Lies are one problem that I have with this story. Another problem that I have with this story is that David did something that the law of Moses specifically condemned. This one is not even questionable. Like, it's not even, well, sometimes a lie and this and that. This is not okay, what he did, to eat the bread that is, holy bread in the tabernacle for the priest only, to be eaten in a special way. And I think that this would be worth comparing. It would be worth comparing 1 Samuel chapter 13 that we talked about a couple Sunday mornings ago. Remember when Saul made a sacrifice, Samuel said, "Wait for me at Gilgal, I'll be there in 7 days and I'll offer the sacrifice." And Saul went ahead and he offered the sacrifice, and Samuel said, "You should not have done that thing." And one of the reasons is because you're not a Levite. You can't make the sacrifice. And so here's David doing the thing that he should not have done. Yep.
Two things. One, you know how you can be talking with someone and they're like, "You won't believe someone did such and such," or something.
Pause. Look. Oh, I can't hit this because I have 2 more things, but that's my next slide. Yeah, we'll get there. I promise. We'll get there. Okay. Others? What about this? This is nothing more. This is not as blatant. I mean, eating the holy bread, that is a blatant violation. In fact, Jesus says, what about David who ate the bread that was not lawful for him to eat? Like, there's no question about that. This one is more a feeling. It's just an impression. What is your impression when you come to verse 8, and David said to Ahimelech, "Then have you not here a spear or a sword at hand? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." And the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod, and you can have that sword." And David says, "Yeah, I'll take that sword. There's none like it. Give it to me." What is your thought about that? Like, what is your, I don't know. Do you have anything about that?
I think there's a shift in his trust that we see. I don't know, he's depending on a sword of somebody he killed with a stone and God's help. And so he's, I don't know, that's
Well,
just my initial thought.
Yes. Me too. Because remember, I'm back in chapter 17 right now. Remember verses 45 through 47 are like the main point of the David and Goliath story. When we went through, we were like, this is, and if you're going to like highlight something in this story to say, this is the point of the story, here it is. And listen to it. Listen to what David said. David said to the Philistine, and this is interesting too, that it's not just that David says, "Oh, hey, cool, give me a sword." It's that he has Goliath's sword. And back in chapter 17, these are the words that David spoke to Goliath. It's neat how it's all connected. And listen to him. David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air, to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Doesn't that, here we are now a couple chapters down the road, and David says, do you have a sword? And he's like, oh, there's Goliath's sword. And he's like, good, I'll take that. Doesn't that sit funny?
Yeah, this, I think you're,
I'm sure it is, especially from the New Testament.
That's gold.
Beat 'em up, but that is who we are too.
I don't think, I did the same thing, I'm going to put that in my notes. I did the same thing with Abraham. I said a couple times in the last couple weeks, going through Genesis and reading about Abraham, my opinion of Abraham has dropped from where it was before because there's so many things that he does wrong. And then I think I had this conversation with a couple folks, and I said, and it makes me feel better about the whole thing. That God said, you trust me, and that's what I want, in spite of your flaws. Like, it's not like those flaws are okay, but we're not looking at perfection here. And that's a great sermon. You did good. That's good. I like it. Another thing? Anything else? I think I had that one up there. Sorry. There's your 1 Samuel. That 17 that I have up there is the I don't come to you with a sword, but in the name of God that we read just a minute ago. There's one more thing, and we didn't read this, and we're not probably going to. I hope that you had time to read this ahead of time, but there was a heavy price to pay for what David did in this story. And since I've been preparing this material, I'm a little farther down the road in some of these classes, but when David has his sin with Bathsheba, the story goes like this again. Everything's on the uphill for David. Everything's going great. Everything's good. And then he sins with Bathsheba. And then for the whole rest of David's story, it's just downhill from there. And it's a story of one consequence after the next. And so, in fact, I did this sermon. The sermon that I did in Normal, Illinois that caused me to say, let's do this class, the name of that sermon is called Repercussions because it's just a list of one bad thing after the next. David did a census. I think Rob pointed us to the census. Instead of relying on God, he came to the end of his life. I think it's in 2 Samuel 24. I'm not sure about that. But he does this census, and it's like he's measuring his power, his military might. And that was wrong, and there were a lot of heavy, heavy consequences to pay for that mistake. And I think David does this thing, and Ahimelech gets called to the principal's office, and he has to stand before Saul, and Saul says, and bring your whole family with you. And he says, because you supplied David with food and with a sword, I'm going to kill you and your entire family. He wipes out the whole priestly family except for one priest who gets away. That's a pretty heavy price to pay for this thing. And so it's like, David, I don't know whether or not, I don't think I should probably throw this one all in David's lap. Because that's Saul's mistake to do what he did. But don't you know that David had to live with that? I'm the one that went to Ahimelech, and I'm the one that asked for the bread and for the sword, and maybe in a situation that I should not have done it in the first place, and now because of that, he and his whole family are dead.
So I was trying to understand the tie to Luke 6. So maybe that's the tie. That Ahimelech was killed, was his family, and then in Luke 6, the Pharisees were trying to hang Jesus, because Jesus healed on Sabbath day. Like I can't figure out what the tie is. And maybe it's just because it's me,
Yeah. So let's go there. Turn up to Matthew 12. Mark, you can make your comment before we leave. Okay. Go to Matthew 12. Okay. So this is my trouble. What really in this class, what I'm doing, I'm just dragging you through my trouble. Because I just wrestled, I wrestle with this text, because if you do more than just a cursory reading, you have to ask yourself, there's a lot of bad stuff on that list. Is it sometimes okay? Does God forgive us in this moment of panic? Or is it not okay and we just don't know about it? I'm not sure I know what to do with it. And then you come over to Matthew 12, and this is another wrench that we have to work through. And I think this is probably the biggest wrench that we have to work through. Let me tell you this. I'm in Matthew 12 right now because if I wanted to persuade you that David was wrong, and I was going to cheat and not give you all the information, then I would have gone to Mark or Luke. Matthew makes it harder. And if we're going to have an honest conversation about this, we need to look at the full scope. So Matthew chapter 12 and verses 1 through 8. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. Benny, there might be something. He and his disciples were hungry, and so here's David running, and he's hungry. That's maybe your key that you're looking for. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." There might also be one of your keys. You're doing something that you should not be doing, like David eating the bread. He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priest? Or have you not read in the law about how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Okay, so before I start on my piece on those verses, what do you see? Is Jesus saying, no. Go ahead. Mark was shaking his head no before I even asked my question. What's funny to me about that is I hadn't put the question together yet, and I was like, oh no, how am I going to say this? What were you going to say?
I thought you were going to say, is Jesus saying that it's okay what David did by saying that what he's doing, comparing what he's doing with what David did? But I don't think that's what he's doing. I think two totally separate things. He's not saying what David did is okay. He already said it was wrong, but he's saying he's even higher up than David and the law of Moses, and what he's doing doesn't apply to this down here.
Okay, so you said, I don't know exactly which one of these you would land on, but the way that you said that whole thing made me think of my first two options. And so I'm going to throw my first two options up here. If you look into this, this is what you're going to see as options for this. Option number one is David and Jesus are both kings and they can do what they want. Now, that's me probably being sarcastic with it, and I shouldn't. But the idea is Jesus is saying something like, well, David did it and it was okay, so I'm going to do it and it's okay. That kind of fits into that first category. The second category is, I think, really where you get into Matthew's gospel more than Mark and Luke, and that is, sometimes there are exceptions to rules. It drives Becky nuts. when I walk in, I don't know, what's the last big purchase we made? Anytime we make a big purchase, I always want to talk to somebody about it. Do you have this thing with a scratch on it? Or how long has it been sitting there? Maybe you'd like to give it to me for a little bit less than what the price tag says, because there's always an exception. There's never a time where it's not okay to say, let's break that rule. Oh, here's a good example. When we went to Dad's appointment to see the oncologist, they said, you can have 2 people in the room. Well, there's Mom and me and my sister. That's 3 people, and it's the whole family. So we said, we're all going back. And that's fine, because sometimes there's exceptions to the rules, and that's fine. So maybe that's this, maybe it is he's running for his life. You don't want him to starve to death. Sometimes it's okay to break the rules. And that would be like in verse 5, have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priest in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? God said don't work on the Sabbath, but in this situation the priests work on the Sabbath because, we're not like people in the news media who can only think one thing at a time. We have the full spectrum in our mind, and we see the big picture. Or what Jesus said, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. It is the merciful thing to do here to give him bread and not let him starve to death. And so maybe sometimes it's okay to break the law. But that just makes me squirm. I just can't. I've never, occasionally, maybe once or twice, I've used that line of thinking, and I've always regretted it. And this is the big reason why. Is that really a door that we want to open? Sometimes you don't have to obey the law. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like that.
I have so many thoughts, and I try to keep it concisely. But in the Matthew, Malachi section we're supposed to, he's doing the same thing, but it's to God's.
Yeah. That's going to be the thing for next Sunday that I'm going to go to. Because here's what I've done. This will be my last thing, and then I'll let you all finish with the thing. What I've always done with this is I've said, no, in Matthew 12, what Jesus is doing is he's pointing to hypocrisy. And so Jesus is saying something like this. You all just love David, and you don't have anything to say about him. That was kind of your comment. You don't have anything to say about David. And me and my disciples are walking through the field plucking heads of grain, and you want to crucify me over that? And so the idea is, how about you talk about David? Like, let's talk about this. But since in my study this week of getting ready for next Sunday's class, I've changed my mind, I don't think that's where I'm going to land anymore. But I'm definitely not going to land on the second one, that sometimes it's okay to break the law. I think there's another way through this. And rather than just telling you, I want you to have to wrestle with it at least for a couple days. If I've wrestled with it for years, you should have to deal with it for 4 days. Jim, did you have something?
My mind centers around mercy, and none of us consider grace and mercy. And really, everybody is violating God's law. It's like a father and my children. When they disobey me, they disobey me. Now, sometimes I may show them mercy, sometimes I may not, depending on me. And sometimes I'm in the mood to punish them. Sometimes I feel like I shouldn't. And we're trying to get into God's mind, I think, and mercy that he showed David, he didn't show sometimes to other people. I don't know that we can use it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and see, I think you're getting the tension that I feel from this. I don't remember who had hands, Jessica.
Was it actually, the Pharisees said, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful, where David was not lawful? Was what the disciples doing actually not lawful, or was it a tradition, as we've had the study, that they held as lawful?
And that's where I would do with this. I'm not even breaking the law, and you don't have anything to say about David. Look what he did.
There's a difference in
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, you say both are bad, but Jesus is like, no, one's bad. This is nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm plucking a head of grain as I walk through the field. That's never what God intended from this Sabbath thing. Yep, Rob?
And there's a lot more to say, but I'm just going to make one final comment for lack of time. And that is your bullet point 1, although I wouldn't have worded it like that, and I don't think I can live with it worded like that. Verse 8 of Matthew 12, I wrestle with why is that there, and what are we supposed to get from it? It's for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. And is he trying to make a point similar to your bullet point number 1? And I don't know, but I wrestle with, okay, if it's not that, why is that there?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm literally God who made the Sabbath in the first place. I'm pretty sure I know if it's okay to pluck a head of grain.
Back to just
Yeah.
the point, that really wasn't a violation of law. It was a violation of traditions, just like in Matthew 15 chapter.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I would like for you to do. Seriously. I'm leaving town tonight, right after class. I'll be leaving early, by the way. I'm not trying to be rude or run out on you, but we got to get to Joplin tonight. I'm going to a wedding, and so send me your text messages, because I'll have a crazy need for conversation and texting over the next couple days. But let's keep this conversation going. And somebody can tell me, if you're going to end up with number 2, somebody can tell me when it is okay. Let's make the standard. When is it okay to violate God's law? And I think you know I'm being sarcastic about that. That's not something that we can do. So thank you for the conversation tonight. And I will see you on Sunday morning. It'll seem like we're doing something totally different, but I think we'll find our answer.